They were upper-class English schoolboys, groomed to become gentlemen.
I was banned from playing the guitar because it was a symbol of the revolution.
It wasn't the proper thing to do, but they became one of the world's biggest rock bands.
It was the most unlikely thing in the world for me ever even to pursue this career. It was never what I was supposed to do.
Lead singer Peter Gabriel put Genesis into the art rock spotlight.
I remember coming out in this fox's head and a red dress. And that was a great way to start a show.
Tell me my life is about to begin. Tell me that I'm a hero.
Soon after Genesis gained stardom, their theatrical frontman made a dramatic exit.
One day we woke up and the front page of Melody Maker was Gabriel quits Genesis.
It was a bit like telling someone who decided to kill their child.
It was like Jagger leaving the Stones.
But Genesis discovered the perfect replacement was already in the band. With Phil Collins out front, Genesis rose from cult favorite to international pop phenomenon.
It's an illusion. It's a game.
But Phil took heat for the band's new musical direction.
Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins, you know, which Genesis do you prefer?
The old Genesis fans nightly stick pins in my effigy.
Then Phil Collins launched a solo career that upstaged the success of Genesis. And after 26 years with the band he helped take to the pinnacle of rock success, Phil Collins quits Genesis.
I'm not part of the story anymore. I'm part of the history, but I'm not part of the current story.
The fans wait 10 years for his triumphant return.
Because tonight.
Now, the story of a few well-bred English gentlemen who took a risk and rocked the world.
Make it right tonight.
Genesis, the story behind the music.
There's a lot of history, and my usual response to how I view my past with Genesis is that it was a healthy part of growing up.
We used to fight a lot in the band, really. I mean, I think it's difficult for close friends to sometimes to be in the same band.
But we never had a single argument about money. We used to argue about music all day long.
When one singer left for a solo career, they found another. And when that singer also became a solo sensation, Genesis still survived. From their art rock early years to their power pop glory days, Genesis had always been able to reinvent itself and move on. But when Collins leaves in 1996, Genesis fans find it hard to accept life without him. The band's history together nearly spans a lifetime. From boyhood to adulthood, the strength of Genesis has been the friendships that formed it.
The childhood bond is between Tony and Peter. They're very close and always have been, still are.
Leaving all the world to play, they disappear.
Shy schoolboys Peter Gabriel and Tony Banks met in 1963 on their first day at one of England's elite boarding schools. The two privileged 13-year-olds attended Charterhouse, founded in 1611, an institution steeped in tradition, discipline, and strict academic standards.
It was a pretty horrible place, and at night time you'd hear sounds of boys either crying or masturbating, or a combination of both. And that was a sort of welcome to public school life.
Public school was reserved for the upper crust of English society, and Charterhouse ranked among England's most exclusive.
It was quite a stuffy public school for its period. You were very out of touch with the real world.
But just a quick train ride away in London, a musical revolution was brewing.
The Beatles were well established. It was before flower power, but I mean, London was definitely swinging. All you wanted to do was to be part of that youth culture of London, which was just so exciting.
By 1965, Anthony Phillips and Mike Rutherford had also entered Charterhouse. The two shared a passion for music and rebelling against the rules of the institution.
We definitely did feel incarcerated.
Actually, I was banned from playing the guitar most of the time I was there because it was a symbol of the revolution. Quite early on, we got into writing our own songs. And to be honest, I'd say that Ant was probably Anthony Phillips, the leading driving force at Charterhouse.
When Mike and Anthony planned to record a demo tape of their songs, Peter and Tony, who had also been writing songs and playing in a band together, volunteered to help.
I said to him, actually, why don't we come along? I'll come along and play keyboards on it. And Peter will come along and play drums. When Ant started singing his song, I thought, well, Peter's got a much better voice than that. Why don't you let Peter sing all the songs, you know?
Peter Gabriel stepped out from behind his drum kit to sing lead vocals.
Tell you the story of how my life ran.
The boys gave their demo to Jonathan King, a Charterhouse graduate with music industry experience.
I think he heard something on it. I think it was probably Peter's voice that he liked.
Hey, you started me going.
The four 16-year-old songwriters were still in school in January of '67 when Jonathan King signed them to a songwriting deal.
Hey!
Later that year, the boys were still at Charterhouse when they got signed to Decca Records.
You're in the hands of destiny.
And we were like sort of part-time school kids. We hadn't really gone serious.
Genesis released their debut single, The Silent Sun, in February of 1968. Peter Gabriel was just 18 years old.
The silent sun that never shines. She is the warmth of my lonely heart.
But DJs didn't spin The Silent Sun. Undaunted, the boys spent their summer holiday in a recording studio and produced their first album.
The album was released to a blaze of obscurity.
Released in the spring of '69, From Genesis to Revelation sold little more than 600 copies.
And of course, the pound note signs weren't flashing.
In midsummer, Peter, Tony, Mike, and Anthony finished their final term at Charterhouse. For the four graduates, it was a defining moment. They could go on to college as everyone expected, or devote themselves to the band.
We somewhat foolishly decided to choose music.
Their parents were less than thrilled.
I'm sure they thought, oh my God, please give him a couple of years and he'll grow out of it,
Music was there as an option, and I knew it was a chance that would only come once.
It was a chance they almost missed. With sales of their first album non-existent, Genesis was soon dropped by Decca Records. Then in March of '70, less than a year after their graduation from Charterhouse, the band played a showcase gig for Charisma Records, where they were seen by President Tony Stratton Smith and Managing Director Gail Coulson.
There were 5 of them on stage and 6 of us in the audience.
Charisma Records signed the band, but guitarist Anthony Phillips was not feeling celebratory.
I suddenly started getting hit by stage fright. It was weird. And I was playing the chords and I suddenly thought, what the hell comes next? And my mind just went completely blank. I just couldn't think. And you sort of go onto autopilot, and I got through it, but it really scared me. It really scared me a lot.
His stage fright got worse as Genesis took to the road, but Phillips kept his anxiety a secret from the band.
And this went on for months. I never actually did lose it, but in the end I physically cracked. I got bronchial pneumonia.
Anthony was bedridden, and after a few weeks off, he found he was out of sync with the rest of the band.
It just felt, I don't know, I think I'd sort of lost it really. My heart had gone out of it really. I wasn't going through the big terrors anymore, but I suppose the dream had gone somehow in a way.
After 4 years playing with the group he once led, Anthony Phillips quit. His former schoolmates and band members were devastated.
It was, like the Musketeers, I thought we couldn't lose one person.
And he was very important to the band in the early stages. I'd say he was almost the key member. And honestly, when he left, I thought we wouldn't carry on.
For the first time, Genesis would have to survive the loss of a leading member of the band. It would not be the last time. Peter Gabriel, Mike Rutherford, and Tony Banks began the search for a guitarist to replace Ant Phillips and a new drummer. Their one ad in London's Melody Maker magazine caught the eye of a 19-year-old drummer named Phil Collins.
I was looking through the adverts and I saw Tony Stratton Smith requires drummer sensitive to acoustic music and 12-string guitar player.
Collins had gone to drama school and worked as a child actor. He had been drumming for years in various London bands when he saw the ad. That day, Collins scheduled an audition at the home of Peter Gabriel's parents.
Pulled up outside this very, very nice country house and said, oh, this is all right, you know. And Mike Rutherford walks in with carpet slippers and smoking jacket, you know, sort of dressing gown. And I thought, this is, well, what planet have I landed on, you know?
Looking for someone.
As soon as he walked in and sat down, the members of Genesis knew Phil Collins was their man.
It's funny with the drummer, when they sit down in the kit before they even play, you get a sort of vibe off them, and he was fantastic.
I thought, this is the guy.
There was no doubt in my mind, or Peter's mind, that Phil was the man.
A month after Collins joined the band, Genesis released their second album in October of 1970.
Stand up and fight, for you know we are right. We must strike at the lies that will spread like disease through harm.
Trespass soon followed their first album into obscurity, but it did help build a cult following for their live shows. That same December, Genesis found a permanent replacement for Anthony Phillips in 20-year-old guitarist Steve Hackett.
I thought they were great, but I thought there was room for improvement. So I guess I was as crazy as they were.
Genesis' classic lineup was in place, and the boys in the band took to the road.
It was great fun. And we just worked and worked and worked. We'd play the north of England one day and we'd play the south of England the next.
By 1971, Genesis had gained the attention of London's music community and their future manager, Tony Smith.
So I was initially struck by Peter because he was extraordinary in the way he looked and the way he presented himself.
With the release of Foxtrot, Genesis finally cracked the UK album charts. And in the fall of '72, with their fourth album headed into the top 20, Gabriel took the band's live act closer to the edge.
We had this album cover for Foxtrot, which had a woman in a fox's head.
And he walked one day on stage in a red dress and a fox's head.
You could tell that the majority of the audience found it very disturbing. It was a great way to start a show.
Suddenly we had our pictures on the front of Melody Maker.
It was far easier to put a picture of him with the flower mask on the front cover of Melody Maker than to put a picture of the five of us who look pretty much like any other rock group.
Genesis suddenly found themselves on the British rock A-list. And by the summer of '73, Genesis had completed their first headlining tour of Great Britain and a full tour of America.
Hey, babe, your supper's waiting for you.
But offstage, the other band members were increasingly bothered by the focus on Peter's theatrics.
If you're the front man for a band, you get to be the main spokesman, and that tends to create quite a lot of resentments.
By the time the fifth Genesis album, Selling England by the Pound, hit the US charts in the fall of '73, Peter was a star, and tensions were running high within the band.
Pete's show tended to get reviewed, and the band didn't really get a review. It was very much he rather than they.
He had some costumes, you couldn't even get his microphone anywhere near his mouth. And you have to ask yourself if that wasn't perhaps going a little too far.
I started to get a little bit frustrated that the people were coming to see what Peter was doing rather than hearing the music.
And the land lies down on Broadway.
Genesis went into the studio in early 1974 to record their next album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But Peter Gabriel had a lot more than music on his mind.
My first daughter was born. They didn't think she was going to survive for a couple of weeks, so there was nowhere else that I wanted to be but with my wife and child. They registered this more as a lack of interest and involvement in the band, and that made me quite angry at the time.
We were unsympathetic. We hadn't had kids. Looking back, I think it must have been hard for him because his life changed and ours didn't.
First to have children, first to realise there was something more to life than just being in a rock band, you know.
But we were at that point where it's the band or it's not the band.
After 9 intense years of playing in a band with his boyhood friends, Peter Gabriel wanted out.
It's a bit like telling someone you decided to kill their child. You know, it's not a good feeling.
When you decided you wanted to leave, I tried to persuade him not to, definitely, because, for all sorts of reasons, really. One is he was my friend, and two, I also thought I didn't know whether the band could survive without him.
And now my ship is sinking. The captain stands alone. And the land lies down.
After taking time off from the band to be with his newborn daughter and to work on a film project, Gabriel returned to tour with Genesis in support of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, the band's third top 10 album in the UK.
So Peter came back. Well, we welcomed him back, of course, but I think we knew at that point that anything could happen at any time.
That time came in the spring of '75.
I think it was like week 1 of the tour in America. Peter came to my room and said he decided that really he wanted to move on and wanted to leave the band. And so my first question, facing a year of gigs in front of me, was when did he want to leave?
I agreed then to carry on doing the touring cycle for the Lamb. But it was very strange knowing that I was going to leave and still be in the band.
The tour ended in France in May of '75. So too did Peter Gabriel's time with Genesis.
That I'd be the first one to go down.
The stunning news made headlines before the band could make a formal announcement.
One day we woke up and the front page of Melody Maker was Gabriel quits Genesis. Somehow the story had leaked. There would be obituaries in the music press. And people would sort of say, oh, no, that's the end of that.
The band's future was not assured by any means.
The remaining members of Genesis were faced with a daunting dilemma.
We desperately wanted to carry on, but we knew how difficult it would be because he'd become the focus of the band, the front man.
We all really thought it was the end of the band. It was like Jagger leaving the Stones.
A lot of people thought, that's it, there won't be any more. He was Genesis.
The misconception at that time was that Peter wrote everything and the band just played the music and that was it.
Determined to keep Genesis alive, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins, and Steve Hackett auditioned hundreds of new lead singers.
It was my job to teach these guys the tunes. I always did the harmonies, and so it was my job to teach these guys the melodies.
During the auditions, the band began to realize that the best new lead singer was already a member of the group.
The guys were saying, well, you sound better than the guys who are auditioning. And I was saying, well, that's as may be, but I'm the drummer. I don't want to be the singer, this is where I live.
With the tracks for their next album nearly finished, Genesis held a final audition.
We had the last Hopeful down, and it didn't sound that great. And as he left, I said, can I have a go? Can I have a go? I know I could do better than this. So I went down to the studio and I started singing the song. And everybody went, yeah, sounds great.
Gone with the towers you had known from a child, along with the dream of a life.
Phil sang all the songs for A Trick of the Tail, but neither Collins nor his bandmates assumed he would be the permanent replacement.
We finished the record without a singer. I had just done the singing, but I was not the singer.
It was very difficult for us to visualize him as anything other than the drummer, and he was also a background kind of guy. He was short. He didn't look like the kind of guy you'd expect to see out the front of a group at all.
I got the job because we couldn't find anybody else,
As they led him away to a cage, beast that can talk, red right out.
When A Trick of the Tail came out in the winter of '76, the enthusiasm of radio stations and record buyers made it triumphantly clear that Genesis would survive without Peter Gabriel. The album soared to number 3 on the UK album charts and nearly made the US top 30. Genesis launched a world tour in the spring with Phil Collins in the center spotlight.
The first show that I ever sang in was London, Ontario in Canada.
We go on stage and, oh, they're all going to go boo, but they loved it. The crowd loved it.
Because he'd come from inside the band, they didn't see it as sort of like an infiltrator. And he also was very good at it.
Angels never know it's time.
And probably, dare I say it, was in some ways a better singer on stage live than Peter. Don't let Peter hear that.
In some ways, he was a more natural singer than I was.
Die-hard Genesis fans were divided by Gabriel's exit from the band.
I mean, the Genesis story is really in two parts, you know, Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins.
I'm sure that the old Genesis fans nightly stick pins in my effigy.
Phil Collins did a brilliant job, and in fact, the band took off to even greater commercial success.
Trick of the Tail sold more than all of the previous Genesis records combined. The band's success stirred mixed emotions in its most famous ex-member.
On the one hand, you're happy that the people you've known with since childhood did well, but my ego got twinged too, you know. So it went from a point, you know, when I was fronting the band, when everyone assumed that I did everything, to a point after I left the band and they got more successful, you know, and people assumed that I'd done nothing.
But by the fall of '77, Peter Gabriel had moved on to what would become an outstanding solo career.
Looks could kill, they probably will. In games without frontiers, war without tears.
At the same time, Genesis guitarist Steve Hackett was also thinking about leaving the band.
I felt this sense of being an outsider from the word go.
He was writing a lot of music and it wasn't getting on the records because there was just no room.
2 years earlier, Hackett had laid down some of his musical ideas on his first solo album. And in the months that followed, Hackett became less and less interested in a future with Genesis. In November of '77, Genesis went into the studio to record their next album. Steve Hackett did not join them.
He never came in. He never came back.
I was worried that if I saw them, they would convince me to stay.
With Steve Hackett gone, the band was now a trio. For Genesis, attrition had become routine.
As a three-piece, there was enough room, I think, for everybody.
In the spring of '78, Phil Collins, Mike Rutherford, and Tony Banks released the aptly titled And Then There Were Three. And 3 proved to be a magic number. On the strength of the hit single Follow You, Follow Me, the trio's album reached an appropriate number 3 in the UK, and by May it was their first gold album in America.
I think what we do with Follow You, Follow Me, of course, being a love song, it kind of doubled our audience because suddenly there were girls in the audience, which there hadn't been before.
Genesis had come a long way from their early days as art rock cult favorites.
I don't know how many old Genesis fans there are of the early days, but you know, a lot of it was they've got a hit single now. Well, that's the end of that.
Well, what has happened is you've gone from being a cult to a big cult to being kind of more mass appeal.
Genesis launched World Tour '78 to support their newfound success. The tour continued for most of the year.
Many too many have stood where I stand.
If we were going to really do this thing properly, we had to go to America and really play everywhere. And that meant time. And in fact, that's what caused my first marriage to break up.
During the course of the tour, Phil's wife left him and moved to Vancouver, Canada to be with her family. In a bid to save his marriage, Phil followed her. Before leaving, he made things clear to Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks.
I said, now I'm going to go and move to Vancouver. So if we can exist as a band with me living there and you living here, that's okay, but otherwise, I'm out. I'm out.
And I'm sure if we'd said, well, listen, man, it's the band or your missus, as happens sometimes in real life, he'd have said, well, to hell with you.
And they said, well, wait. You go ahead. You have a couple of months on your own, sort it out, and then we'll just get on with, we'll do our solo albums, won't we?
For the first time since they started playing together 13 years earlier, Genesis was taking a break. January of '79 saw Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks working on solo projects, while Phil Collins worked on his marriage. Genesis faced an uncertain future.
Please tell her to be patient, 'cause there has never been a time that I wanted something more.
Phil was taking time off to try and sort out his marriage.
I went over to Vancouver and I stayed there for a couple of months, and it was obvious that things weren't going to work out any better than they were before. So I came back.
His marriage over, 29-year-old Phil returned to England and his empty house. It was there that he began doing something he thought he'd never do.
I'd written bits, but never written songs. And suddenly there was all this stuff that I kind of wanted to get out of me, I suppose.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh, Lord.
I didn't ever intended it to be a record. I just was writing songs, and kind of, in a way, sort of stupid, childish way, just thought, I'm not very good with words, and so I'll just send her these songs. Then she'll understand, you know? That was my feeling. That was what those songs were written for. They were messages. They were kind of letters.
And I've been waiting for this moment for all my life.
When Genesis manager Tony Smith came by to visit, Phil played him home recordings of his new songs.
The last time we ever met.
And we said, these are great, you know, this could be a record.
Phil brought his homemade tapes to producer Hugh Padgham.
We listened to these songs and I just thought they were amazing.
Padgham agreed to help turn Phil's deeply personal tracks into an album.
We all knew what was going on and the angst and heartache.
Phil also played his songs for Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks.
I was sort of surprised. He always had this side to him, which was sort of like his sort of James Taylor side.
I think I was probably jealous because he was able to write so much from the heart about his life and what was going on.
Now it's not like me to say the right thing.
Mike and Tony picked two of Phil's songs for the upcoming Genesis album. When it was released in March of 1980, Duke went all the way to #1 in the UK.
There must be some misunderstanding. There must be some kind of mistake.
Phil Collins' songwriting talents were widely celebrated when Face Value, the collection of Phil's open musical letters to his wife, was released in 1981.
Phil's first album, solo album, Face Value, came out and just took off.
In the Air Tonight came out, and by 2 weeks it was on #2 in the charts, which was a bigger hit than we'd ever had, you know, as a group. So it was sort of a bit strange, really.
When In the Air Tonight hit the top 20 in America, Phil became a certified solo star.
I know I thought, well, maybe he'd want to carry on just doing that, nothing else, which would have been perfectly understandable.
Mike and Tony realised that here was not only a great singer and a great drummer, but a great writer too.
For the next 4 years, Phil kept up a successful solo career while collaborating with Mike and Tony on a series of top 10 Genesis albums.
Look up on the wall. They're on the floor.
Some accused the former public school art rockers of selling out.
If you get too popular, then yes, you're going to be seen to sell out. But selling out to me implies doing something which you don't believe in, you know, and you're compromising in certain ways. I never did that.
The people that had Genesis, the epic, in their mind, this was not what they wanted to hear.
Tell me, do you think I'm so bad?
In a highly successful musical balancing act, all three members of the band kept Genesis alive while continuing their solo pursuits.
Say it loud.
Rutherford's 1986 album Mike and the Mechanics went gold and spawned a top 10 U.S. single.
I'm always amazed more bands don't do what we did, which is to do different things and still run the group at the same time.
Genesis becomes something that we can't possibly do on our own. It gives the band a reason to exist. So it actually strengthened the band in some respects.
Genesis showed their strength as a group in the summer of '86 with the release of Invisible Touch. Entering the UK charts at number 1, the album went to number 3 in America and sold over 5 million copies. By that fall, Genesis was playing the biggest stadiums in the world.
And I remember them doing 3 sold-out nights in Wembley Stadium. And you're talking 70 or 80,000 people a night. Well, I remember thinking, Jesus, this is big.
The band's Invisible Touch tour played through the summer of '87, after which Genesis took a well-earned break. Tony, Mike, and Phil devoted most of the following 4 years to solo projects before making their next Genesis record. But the 1991 album We Can't Dance would be Phil Collins' last with the band. On March 28, 1996, Phil Collins publicly announced his departure from Genesis. For Phil, Mike, and Tony, it was the end of more than a quarter century of making music together.
Tony said, it's a sad day. Well, we're going to carry on, but it's a very sad day.
There's no point in trying to pretend.
Collins' exit left Genesis with just 2 original members. Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks had seen the band through all its changes and challenges, from its schoolboy origin to superstardom. Now Mike and Tony faced a difficult decision, to quit or carry on.
To be honest, I had quite a few doubts actually, and I think if it had been just down to me, I might well have said, well, let's call it a day.
I'm not really sure what made us decide to give it a try. I suppose stubbornness.
So when they said they were going to carry on, I was really, really pleased because I didn't really want to split it up. I just didn't want to be in it.
But I don't think that's really true.
Genesis found a new voice with the addition of singer Ray Wilson, who sang the lead on the band's 1997 album, Calling All Stations. But the public reaction to the new Genesis lineup was extreme. They didn't seem to be ready for a Genesis without Phil Collins.
Phil was such a huge name and face. Losing that, it's always going to be hard anyway.
There's nothing left now.
It allowed the band to breathe again rather than the focus being on Phil Collins, and I think that was healthy for Genesis, but the end result was going to be that they weren't going to sell as many records.
At the point before it came out, everyone said, oh, it's going to come in at number 3 or something. And I thought, well, okay, great, fantastic. And then it came in at number sort of 43, so we knew we were in trouble at that point.
It's not about pain, we always feel.
They announced an American tour, but with hardly any airplay or chart success, found it hard to sell tickets.
We were down to play places in America, 20,000 seaters, and we were selling 20 or 30 tickets.
The fans were staying home.
There wasn't enough support there to really make it worthwhile, so we cancelled it.
The lukewarm public reaction forced Mike and Tony into making one of the most difficult decisions of their careers. It was the end of Genesis.
We were getting older and just felt perhaps we didn't want to go through all that again, really, in a way, sort of, and all the knocks and everything, that you have to put up with.
I hadn't got the energy to go and do this again.
And Ray Wilson found himself without a band.
I feel shipwrecked.
I know Ray was angry about it at the time, because he felt, maybe rightly, that we hadn't given it enough of a shot.
It's a shame for Ray. I always feel bad about that in a sense, because I think it was hard for him.
And he thought he could build on it. And, he maybe he was right, maybe he wasn't. We'll never know.
Meanwhile, for Phil Collins, life was looking good. He married Orianne Seavey in 1999.
Phil Collins!
Received a prestigious star on Hollywood Boulevard and started working for Disney.
Disney was part of my life, so for me, and especially having kids, when I was asked, it was a dream come true.
I wanna know, can you show me?
His first project was the animated feature film Tarzan, and one song was to bring him a trio of top awards.
We got the Grammy.
Thank you very much.
and the Golden Globe, and also the Oscars.
Very, very emotional, because I'm only a drummer really, and to get something like this was really, I hoped, but I didn't expect.
And then, of course, it then developed into a musical as well.
Which was probably the highlight of my musical life, really. Doing that on Broadway, every day, going to work. They'd say, "We need a song, Phil. We need a song for this scene." It was fantastic.
Elated by his success and the birth of his son Nicholas, Phil released a new solo album, Testify, which was once again a very personal record.
Testify my love for you. Those songs just came, you know, I mean, they just came. I was desperately happily married. Yes, this is a wake-up call. I just felt rejuvenated, you know.
The birth of Matthew, his second child with Oriane, made Phil come to a major decision in his life: to stop his seemingly endless days of touring. He had been on the road for 30 years, and with young children, he decided that enough was enough.
I want to do the things that I hadn't been able to do with my older kids, and so I decided not to do anymore.
So in 2005, to say goodbye, he embarked on what would be his final solo tour.
No, I can't stop loving you.
It would be both physically and emotionally exhausting.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't sing anymore.
During this tour, Phil's marriage started to break down, and Phil and Oriane announced they were separating.
I was going through an awful lot, having just got my kids, my young kids, you know. Then suddenly it started to fall apart. My ex-wife and I still love each other, and I don't know why, but we got divorced.
But Phil was determined not to miss out on his kids growing up, so he stayed in Switzerland to be near them. Meanwhile, for Mike and the Mechanics, life was changing too.
I'm a beggar, and I'm sitting on a beach of gold.
After the release of their album M6, Paul Young, their long-standing vocalist, died suddenly at home.
Paul Young was one of life's lovable characters. And Rose, he lived the rock and roll lifestyle, even when he went home. Very sad, I mean, such a young age, a fabulous voice, great talent, and a huge shock, really.
I want a perfect child.
A further album and tour followed in 2004, but they found it hard to recapture their earlier success. Tony Banks in his solo career was to fulfill a lifetime ambition when he released his orchestral album, Seven.
I wasn't sure I was ever going to do any more music again. I had no idea. You know, I thought, well, before I give up, you know, I must just give this a go.
But Tony found the classical world far from rock and roll.
You feel a little bit inadequate in the classical world when you come from the rock world, I think. You're conscious of people thinking you're not a proper musician. So there's a bit of that you've got to get over.
But with no live performances, the album remained a critically acclaimed secret. A few years earlier, the original members of Genesis had met to promote the release of a series of box sets documenting their career. From this reunion, the seeds were sown for a possible tour of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with the classic Genesis lineup of Gabriel, Hackett, Rutherford, Banks, and Collins. A further meeting was set, but things didn't quite go to plan.
I'm counting out time.
Anyway, when we got to the room, apart from it being great to be the five of us together again, it turned out that Pete still hadn't made up his mind.
I think he got slightly cold feet when he actually met with us and suddenly realised that he wouldn't be able to call the shots.
But when he left the room and Steve left the room, we kind of looked around at each other, me, Tony and Mike, and said, "Would you fancy doing the other lineup? Because, you know, we've got three of us here, do you want to do it?"
The great thing about us always, you know, we did something so quickly, the three of us. So that was the decision, and we sort of put the idea in place.
And in 2006, delighted Genesis fans received news that Phil Collins was reuniting with Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks, and Genesis would tour again.
I think this one probably was the biggest, yeah. It certainly was ambitious. And certainly we spent a hell of a lot of money for 50 shows.
It was to be the most elaborate and expensive tour they had ever undertaken. With 190 trucks on the road and 3 full-time road and rigging crews, it was a comeback their fans would never forget.
It was easy to get up, easy to get down, providing it didn't rain.
But rain it did. Freak storms battered the shows, putting band, crew, and fans at risk.
In a situation like this, when we have lightning, first thing is everyone comes out of the rig, no questions asked, and everyone comes down.
What happens if it's lightning while we're on stage? We clear the stage, we have to leave.
You know, at one point it was just it's all over the place. You know, I thought we're going to be taken off any minute, no problem, you know. And they didn't take us off. They took the guys down who were doing the follow spots, you know, because anyone would get struck by lightning, but we were there. So you get these great shots of the lightning actually flashing behind the stage.
But come rain or shine, the fans couldn't get enough. And by the time the band got to Rome, there were 500,000 in the audience.
It was the best show they've done, and I think they all were playing better than ever. Phil was singing better than ever. It was a great, great show. I mean, I think it was very special.
It's just a great thing to have in your collection of what you've done with your life.
The bond of friendship that held Genesis together for more than 4 decades still endures. And after their sellout reunion tour, the fans remain hopeful that the Genesis story isn't finished yet.
We always discussed the idea of writing some songs together. It was quite appealing, actually. The 3 of us, we love that. But then it's after that, what do you do with it? You know, an album is such a big commitment.
You don't really want to get into a room and suddenly find there's no magic there, you know. It'd be a bit depressing, wouldn't it, really? But it's more fun not to do it and think, well, there could be if we did it, but we won't.
In the immediate future, I can't see it happening. If we still feel like it when my kids are driving, that'll be different.